All right, hello. This is the video that I'm going to make for doing the real-time combat system for the top-down game that we've been working on. I'm going off the tutorial that I put in class assets, tutorials, real-time top-down combat system. And these are some scans from a book I found in my garage. Hopefully this will be fun and not a total train wreck. I haven't looked at these before, but obviously these scans don't go off of what we've been doing. So that's what this video is for, making it like convert. If you do follow these, make sure you go in order. It says like part 1, part 2, part 3. The first part is going to be the health and inventory because of course those are going to be connected. So this is going off the scene change and audio lessons that we did. I did nothing beyond that besides import some UI from the Unity Asset Store. Most of these were free. Maybe some of them were cheap, but whenever you download something from the Asset Store, you have it permanently. So if you see anything cool in the store, I recommend downloading it. And then I downloaded some player attack sprites, which I assume that we're going to need at some point. So I'll go ahead and get started. I'm just looking at the tutorial and I'm going to go off that. Looks like the first thing it wants us to do is make a canvas for the HP bar. We already have a canvas from the dialogue lesson that we did before, so we can go ahead and use that. If your canvas isn't a prefab, I recommend doing that by dragging it from the hierarchy to your content browser. And when it turns blue, you can click on this little arrow here to go into prefab mode. Now every change we make will be edited across every instance of the canvas that we have in our project. So I click on the canvas. All these settings should be fine. The first thing we're going to do is make an HP bar background. So I'm going to right click the canvas, go to UI, image, name this HP background. And then I'm going to, while it's blue, I'm going to click F, and that's going to take me to the HP background. Then we're going to set the anchor point to, it's doing top right. I'm going to put mine in the top left so that my HP bar, no matter what size or resolution the screen is, it will always be in the top left. I actually don't know where it is right now, so I'm going to click on the UI canvas parent object, and while it's blue, I'm going to click F, and I can see where the entire canvas. Then I'm going to click my HP background bar again and drag it to the top left corner. If your transform tool isn't showing up, just press W to bring up the transform. I'm going to change the width to maybe 350. Drag it out a little bit so that it's in place, and that looks good. This is the background, so I'm going to choose like a solid object for my HP background. That looks fine to me, so I'll go ahead and use that. The next thing we do is we're going to create a mask. And a mask is basically going to prevent, well, let me just show you. I'm going to right click on the HP background, go to UI, create another image. And it created a child image. Because it's a child, it's in the same transform as the parent object. And basically everything that goes out of the bounds of this child, of this white box here, will not render. So it won't exist. So I'm guessing that we're going to put the HP meter there so that it doesn't extend past the HP background border. I'm going to make this the same width, a little bit smaller actually. Oops. Maybe like 330. And then the height a little bit smaller as well. Ooh, maybe a little bit smaller. 80. 80 by 320 by 80. 330, 325 by 80. That'll be fine for now. I'm going to name this one HP mask. And I'm going to make another child for the meter. So I'm going to right click UI, image, name this one HP meter. I'm going to find something for my HP bar in the image components, change the sprite to something green. That's perfect. This is not working correctly because I forgot to add the mask component to the mask. That would kind of be helpful, wouldn't it? So on the mask HP object, I clicked add component and added a mask component. Now you can see the HP meter doesn't go beyond the mask. So you can see when I deactivate that, that's how it works. Pretty cool. The HP meter, I'm going to make that the same dimensions as the mask. So 325 by 80 for me. That looks good. And in the image component, in the image type field, I'm going to change that to filled, change the fill method to horizontal, change the fill origin to left. That's fine. And this is how you make a HP bar. So now when I change the fill amount, when I drag the slider, it goes up and down, which is pretty cool. The next step is probably going to be to change this in code, depending on how much HP we have. Actually, one more thing before we move on to coding the HP bar is making the HP text. So I'm going to right click on the HP background, UI, text mesh pro. You might have to import TMP stuff. That's okay. I'm going to rename this HP text. I'm going to change my font to something else. I think that looks fine. I'm going to make it so that the alignment is in the center, left center, and then I'm going to drag it here. All right, the next step, there's no right or wrong way to do it, but I'm just going to do it in the way that I think suits this project the most. We're going to make 2 classes to start with for every entity in our game, player and enemy, and they're both going to derive from the character class. So we talked about inheritance in class. This is the same idea. I made a new folder. You don't have to make a new folder, but I made a folder called entities for these 3 scripts. So I made 3 empty scripts: character, enemy, and player. So I'm going to open up the character script, and this is going to have everything that our enemy that's in common with our enemies and players. So the first thing I'm going to do is give it the abstract keyword there, public abstract class character that derived from auto behavior. This means that it cannot be used, only its subclasses can be used. So AKA player and enemy. So I don't need the start and update functions. Right now, I just want everything that is a character to have hit points. So I'm going to give it a public integer hit points. And then somehow it knows, but I also want everything to have the public integer max hit points. So because I kind of filled that out, I can just press tab. That's the benefit of Visual Studio Code. So I highly recommend that you're using Visual Studio Code. The other benefit is I can click on this search button up here and go directly to the player script like that. Again, I don't need the start and update function. The only thing we're going to do here right now is make it collect those character variables. So now it derives from character because I changed mono behavior to character. That's how inheritance works. And you would do the same thing for the enemy script, but we're not there yet. All right, then I made one more folder in Unity called scriptable objects. So I made a folder in my scripts folder called scriptable objects. This is where we're going to make the scriptable object hit points. So you just make a regular old script, create C# script, name it hit points, then open it up. I don't need the start and update function. To make a scriptable object, you would just change it from mono behavior to scriptable objects. And it wants us to have, this is just going to hold the value. So public float value, the value of our hit points. And then I'm going to create an asset menu so that we can actually create scriptable objects from the content browser. Menu name equals hit points. So feel free to pause and do that because that's basically going to be our scriptable object. That's going to be how we hold the data of our HP for enemies and players. Then we need to make a change to the character class. Now that we actually made the hit points into a scriptable object, we can, instead of that being an integer, it's now, we made our own variable, right? So change int to hit points, and we're going to change max hit points to a float. And then we're also going to add another float, public float starting hit points. Cool. I spelled that wrong now. Points. We'll use this property to set the number of hit points a character starts with. Okay. Brilliant. All right, first we'll make some updates to the player script. I'm going to go through what it is here. I'm also going to put this script in the same place in the class assets where this tutorial is, just so, minimize the amount of suffering. Not everybody has to type this out, but if you want to, feel free to go ahead and do that. You can pause it. But it's actually not that much. In fact, this whole on-trigger enter method is from running into health heart points on the level, which was in a previous chapter, which I will scan later. But we don't need it for now, so I'm going to highlight it all and hit Control / to comment it out for now. That gets rid of the arrows and just leaves us with this up here, which is instantiating. This is where we're going to pit the variables from our HP bar that we made so that we can have a reference to them. Then at the bottom, we have this adjust hit points bool method, which I assume is what we're going to use to adjust our hit points when we bump into an enemy or if we run into HP potion or something. We have, remember we talked about arguments. Wherever we call this method, I assume will insert the argument of how much it wants to adjust our health, which it'll do so here. And then I also made a health bar script. In my scripts folders, I made a folder for combat scripts, and then I made a script called health bar. I open that up, and this is what it looks like. Again, this is not a lot, but I'm also going to put it in the folder, and this just gets a reference to the variables we need, and then at the start, it sets the hit points to the health bar to whatever our character's max hit points are. And then every frame it's checking if our character does our character exist or not? Is he null or not? And then it will fill our health bar to the value of the value of the value variable on our hit point scriptable object. And then it also sets the text right there. And then it knows exactly which prefab is the actual is actually corresponding to our health bar, because we put this line here in the player entity script. All right, after you updated the player and the health bar scripts, make sure you go to File, Save All. Make sure it's all saved. Then go back to the Unity editor, and then there's a couple more things that we have to do, and then we'll be all set with setting up the health bar. I'm going to use the UI canvas. In this, it is using an HB object, a health bar object. I'm just going to use the UI canvas. I don't see, hopefully nothing wrong happens with that. I'm going to add that health bar script to that. And now this is going to be what we instantiate when the player is instantiated. In this line, this is going to be basically spawned as the health bar prefab at the start of the game. And we need to fill up these input fields with our hit point scriptable object. I'm going to make that in my scriptable objects folder by going create and hit points. And because we added that create asset menu line, we can now create hit points from here. I'm going to name it hit points and click on my UI canvas and drag hit points into that input field. And then where we made the health bar earlier, I'm going to drag the HP meter into that field. And then the text does not work because, this is a text and not a TM Pro. So in the health bar script, I'm going to change this public text from text to text mesh pro UGI. And then save that and go back to Unity editor. That's probably just because they changed that fairly recently. And the book was released before that change. So now I can drag that into there. And then that should be all set. And then I just need to go to my player prefab, and add the player script that we made to here. And then that's going to be using the same scriptable object that we just made. Max hit points, I'll say 10 for now. And then starting hit points will probably be 10 as well, but I'm going to do 6 just for debugging purposes. And then the health bar prefab, we can go to our prefabs folder. And because we added that health bar component to the UI canvas then is our health bar prefab, which will be instantiated along with our player, which means that we'll probably end up deleting it from the hierarchy. But I think that's all set for setting up the health bar. I'm also going to go back to the HP bar script and add a colon and a space after the HP because I think that looks better. And then on the player script, I'm going to change everything that's in the start function into an awake function. What happened to my stuff? Into the awake function so that it's instantiates this canvas before this start method is played on the teleport from script, because that's going to cause some issues. So I save that, go back to Unity, press play. By the way, before you test, just make sure that the UI canvas that's already in the hierarchy is either deactivated or removed from the hierarchy, because now it's instantiated from our player, which means that our player is spawning it, and we don't want to have two at the same time. Play and see if it works. And that's looking good. And you can see the HPAR starts at 60, and everything's good so far. Now I'm going to open up the UI canvas prefab, and we're going to make the inventory UI. Looks like this inventory UI is just going to be slots that appears on our screen, which I like it. It's nice and simple. Looks like we're going to start the same way. It actually has a different canvas for every object, for like the health bar, the inventory, and whatnot. I'm just going to put it all on the same canvas because I think that makes the most sense. Hopefully that does not bite me in the butt later. So I'm going to right click on UI canvas and make an empty, actually, yeah, just going to create an empty and call it inventory background. And here I'm going to make another empty, create empty right, and call it slot. And the inventory background is going to have a horizontal layout group on it. And this is just going to lay out everything in a grid for us. That'll make sense later. And these slots, we're just going to make these and then turn them into a prefab later. So the slot's going to require a, let's see what the slot requires. All right, the slot requires a slot background, which, yeah, it's going to be an image. I'm going to call it slot background. And it's also, as another child of the slot, is going to be a tray for the text. That shows how much of an item we have. So I'm going to make this quantity text, quantity tray. And then as a child of the quantity tray is going to be a UI text mesh pro, which will be the quantity text. And then for the slot background, we're going to have nothing. Oh no, the tray should be a child of the slot background. And then as a child of the slot, we are going to have the actual image that the item is on. So we're going to create a UI image and call that item image. And then I'm going to disable the image because in code, we're actually going to change that image to whatever our item is. And we're not going to want the white box to show. Okay. So the slot background, I'm going to make that into something, I don't know. Type in slot. Let's see. This will work. Going to use the obsidian slot. I can't see it. That's fine. Let's see. Slot. I think we want that anchor to just be in the center. And then I'm going to change the width to 80 and the height to 80. And change that back to center. Slot background width to 80, height to 80. And the quantity tray, let's just see what they did. Looks like they made it 48 by 32. And the quantity tray is anchored to the bottom right. So if I go to the anchor, bottom right, and then set the position to 0, 0, it should end up there. Perfect. For that, I don't know. Let's try this. That'll work, but the corners are kind of stretched. To fix that, you could go to the, I'm going to make a new tab, a new project tab. And then I'm going to go click on this to go to that sprite. Click on the sprite, go to the sprite editor, and then add some borders so that you can see this little green line, so that every corner is basically within a green line. So now that Unity knows, hit apply. Unity knows what the borders are. If I go to that tray image and change the image type to filled, no, sorry, sliced, and then see, look, the corners aren't stretched anymore. And I think you could also make them smaller. So yeah, I just pixels per unit multiplier made that a little smaller. So that looks good enough. The text, let's see what they did. They did 25 and 20. Perfect. Make that smaller, maybe 16. Got to change the sample text to 00. And then I'm going to make sure that that's perfectly centered with the alignment and disable that text, because that text is only going to show up if we have more than one item. That looks pretty good. Let me see if that's everything. All right, so that's going to be our slot prefab. All right, before moving on to the next step, I want to make the slot from our inventory into a prefab. So I'm going to drag it into the prefabs folder, because we're actually going to instantiate the slots via code. Then I can delete it from the hierarchy now that it is a prefab. And before we actually make the inventory, a lot of the code is going to involve items. So we're actually going to make the item scriptable object. To do that, I'm going to create an empty object and call it coin. I'll just start with coins, and I'm going to add a sprite renderer component to it. See if I have a coin graphic. I do have a coin graphic, so you could use a placeholder or whatever you have. I'm going to bring the position to 0 so that I can see what it looks like. And then I'm going to change the sorting layer in the sprite renderer component to, I'm going to make one called objects, I guess, and put that in front of the ground but behind the player. Go back to the coin, change that to objects. And I'm also going to make a tag for the coin. Looks like they're using can be picked up. So I'm just going to use what they're using, can be picked up tag. So I'm going to press this, can be picked up. This is how we're going to reference it in code. Change it to that. And the layer to, they're using consumables. And they also have an enemies layer. So I added 2 layers, consumables and enemies, but I'm going to change the coin to be on the, I guess, consumables layer, because when we walk over it, we will collect it. And then when enemies walk over it, we don't want them to collect it. So going to edit, project settings, and then I think physics 2D, no, physics. And then scroll down to the graph, and where you see consumables and enemies overlap, you want to uncheck that. So enemies and consumables will not interact with each other. And this is all in the chapter before this chapter, in the items chapter, which I will post as well. And then we just want to add a collider, I guess circle collider 2D to the coin. That looks pretty good to me. And then check is trigger and drag that into the prefabs folder as well. And then we can delete it from the hierarchy. All right, now we're going to store our coin, the data for our coins, as a scriptable object. That way we'll be able to save it when we close out of the game. And it's just good in general to store your data as a scriptable object. So I went back to my scriptable objects folder and made a new script called item, which we're going to turn into a scriptable object. So I'm going to open it up, and this is what it is. I'm going to delete the start and update function. And basically this is just, again, storing all of the data for coins, the name, the sprite, the quantity, is it stackable or not, and whether what type of item it is. For now, we'll just have coin and health. And just remember to, instead of mono behavior, it derives from scriptable object. And you want to have this create asset menu so that we can actually make them. And this script will be in the class files as well. So then I save that, go back to Unity Editor, and now we're going to make, because scriptable objects can actually go onto items or objects or prefabs, I'm going to make a consumable script. I just made a folder called inventory scripts. So I have a consumable script, and also in a bit we're going to make an inventory and a slot script, so you can make those right now if you want. But in the consumable script, I don't need the start and update again. All it is going to be a reference to our item scriptable object, and that's it. So this is what we're going to put on the coin prefab, I believe. Yes, we're gonna, the prefab of the coin that we made in the prefabs folder, I'm going to add the consumable script to it. But you see the item input field is blank. So I'm gonna go back to my scriptable objects folder. And now we should be able to create an item scriptable object. So right click, create item, name it. I guess it wants me to name it item. I don't know why it's not gonna name it coin, but I guess because we name it coin up here, it doesn't matter. So we name it item, object name, coin, sprite. This is how it's gonna show up in the inventory. So I just put the coin there. I mean, really the coin prefab, you might have it animated, but yes, it's stackable. Item type could be coin or health. It's gonna be coin. Okay, now we can go back to the coin prefab. And I'm just gonna open that up. And now I can drag in that scriptable object item. And while we're doing items, I guess we're gonna go ahead and make a health object pickup that gives you health when you walk over it. So I'm gonna name this heart object. And then I'm going to add a sprite renderer. We're just doing the same thing that we did before for the coin, except I'm gonna put a heart icon for this, bring it to the objects layer so I can see it. Looks good. Make the tag can be picked up, make the layer consumables, and gonna need, I guess, circle collider 2D. That looks good. Gonna change that to is trigger. I'm gonna add a consumables thing to it, and then we're gonna have to make a scriptable object for this as well. I'm gonna go ahead and make this heart object into a prefab. You might want to make a folder for your items and whatnot. Then I'm gonna go to the scriptable objects, make another prefab, create item, name this one heart, object name heart, sprites, gonna use the same heart sprite. Quantity, apparently according to this is what's it's going to give you the life back for the quantity that you insert here. So if you want to regain like 1 hit point, then you put 1. I guess that's just how they're doing it. That's okay. I'm going to change the item type to health and make sure that I leave stackable. Ooh, I spelled that wrong. Leave stackable to unchecked. And then that's going to be going to go back to prefab mode on the heart object and drag that heart scriptable object there. And now I'm going to delete it from here, and that's our heart. All right, I'm actually going to leave the heart there for testing purposes right now. I'm going to go back to the player script and comment all of this back in, which should work now. Save it, go back to Unity, and when I press play and walk over this heart, my health should go up 1 hit point. So it should go from 60 to 70. Awesome. All right, awesome. So it's working great. This is pretty cool. So now I can get health, and now we just have to finish the inventory so I can collect coins. All right, now back to making the inventory. The last thing we did was make the slot into a prefab. Now we're going to make the actual script that goes onto the slot prefab. So in my inventory scripts folder, if you didn't make an inventory and a slot script, you can go ahead and do that now. I'm going to go ahead and open up the slot script. And it's very short. The only thing that's important to remember is that you're using the Unity engine.ui at the top, and this is just keeping a track of our quantity text. So you can save that, go back to the Unity engine, open up your slot prefab, and put that, press add component, and put the slot component. and then find your quantity text in the prefab and put that into the input field, and that's all set. So now we can go back to the scripts, open up the inventory script. I'm going to go over what this is doing, but the most important thing I think to keep note is that on line 36, when you're getting a child of index 0, this script is going to be on the UI canvas prefab. It's going to be on the UI canvas. So when it's getting the index of 0, that means it's getting the first child, which means it would be getting this child. So you'd want to make that the inventory background that we made instead. This is a very fragile way of doing things. If you want, you can do it the same way that we did the slot by making it an input field that it just automatically has it, but I'll leave that to you guys. Let's go back. It's doing the same thing with getting a child of index of 1 on the slot prefab. Because when it's getting the first child, everything in Unity starts on 0. So this would be 0 and item image would be 1. And this is how we're setting the images for each of the items. All right, this is our inventory script. To start, we are storing a reference to our slot prefab. The inventory bar contains 5 slots. We use the const keyword because this is not something that we're going to be modifying. Then here we we create an array for all of our items, our item images, our items, and our slots, and all of them are going to have 5. And then down here is when we are creating the slots, and I'm just going to look at the book to make things easier. We check to make sure that we set the slot prefab via the Unity editor. Then we loop through all of the slots. Then we instantiate a copy of the slot prefab and assign it to new slot. And then this is what I was talking about before, where we get the first child with the index of 0 in the inventory object, which is our canvas. Then we assign this new slot object to the slots array at the current index. And then the child object at the index of 1 would be the item image. We retrieve that image component and assign it to the item images array. This is what's going to appear in the inventory. All right, before we move on, because I really don't like getting references to objects through their index number of their children, because sometimes the order of children can change and that would mess everything up. So instead, we're getting it from an inspector reference. I went ahead and changed this line right here to get the inventory background from up here, from a public game object. So now we can just assign that from the inspector, which we'll do in a little bit. I also did the same thing for this line for our slots that we'll be instantiating from an array. Now it gets the image from, if we go to the slot script, there's a public image item image here, which we can also assign from the inspector. So I highly recommend doing that as well if you're following along. And there's just a few other things in code that we have to do before we're all set. I'm kind of just going off, not really following the book anymore because we did some things differently. But before this line said should disappear equals true. Now I'm going to change that to should disappear equals inventory.add item. So we're going to call the method that we just created, and it's going to add the item for what we just hit. And where is it getting this reference for the inventory? Up here, we add a public inventory variable. So in the book, it's getting that from a canvas that it instantiates, but since I put this on the canvas that we already had, we're just going to instantiate that canvas here, right? Remember, the health bar prefab is the UI canvas. So because our inventory script is going to be on that canvas, we're just going to get it from there by doing inventory equals healthbar.getComponent.inventory. And you have to remember, we don't actually want to get the prefab. We want to get the canvas that's actually in the scene. So we get the health bar instead of the health bar prefab. And then this should be all good to go. And I actually made a list of everything that I did because I'm not following the book anymore, but Okay. Make sure you save all and then go back to Unity. And then you can open up your UI canvas prefab and prefab mode and add the inventory script to the parent object. And then see, now we can, instead of relying on getting it as the first child of the index, we can just drag it in there. And no matter what order it is, we'll always have it. But not, I don't want it to be child. We'll just put it back there. Okay. And then the slot prefab. Now we could just get the slot prefab from our content browser and drag that in there. I have the item images pulled up just for debugging purposes. And now I'm going to open up the slot prefab. And I'm going to drag the item image into the item image input field. So now that we always have a reference for that. I'm also going to set the scale to 0.7 for everything, just because I don't want it to be too big, but you can experiment with how big you want the slots to be. Now I'm going to go back to the UI canvas, and we didn't actually position this yet, so I'm going to set the anchor to the top left so that no matter what size it is, it's always going to be in the top left. And then I'm going to set the position to 0, 0 for now so that it goes up there. Maybe drag it out a little bit. And if you want to test how it's going to look with 5 slots, which is what we set it up as, I'm just going to drag that prefab as a child and press Control D 4 times. So now you can see there's 5 of them. And then I'm going to drag it out a little bit like this. And you can see the spacing. I set mine to 50. You could set the spacing to like 20 or whatever you want it to be. I think it's going to be a little bit bigger when I press play, so I'm going to keep it as 50. And you want to make sure you delete these or deactivate them, because we are going to be instantiating them from code. Let's see what's next. I'm going to go back to the slot prefab because this item image is bigger than the actual box. So I'm going to put that to 80 and 80 on the item image. All right, let's see if that works. So I'm going to go back to my scene. I already dragged in some coins, but you could just drag in some coin prefabs. And I'm going to press play and see what happens. All right, I can see my inventory looks pretty good. It's in the top right corner. I walk over some coins. I get them. The number is increasing. All right, that looks pretty cool. That's awesome. So that's a pretty simple way. That volume is really loud in my ear. That is a simple inventory system. Looks like the next thing to do will be characters, coroutines, and spawn points, which we already did like 2/3 of that. So hopefully that's a little bit easier. But yeah, that's it. Looking good. This is awesome. So this is what it looks like, the final product. When you run over the HP, you get health. When you run over the coins, they get added to your inventory. You'd probably want to add feedback for when you run over different objects. You'd probably want to add different items you could collect. You'd probably want to add different purposes for the items. I know in this book they talk about a shop later on, which I'll probably go over. You could use the items for quests. I'm going to try to find a way to integrate that into the quest system that I have here. You probably want different items that you can collect. Maybe when you reach a certain amount of something, you just win the game. There's a ton of different things that you can do starting here. The next video is going to be on the combat system, but the sky's the limit. But yeah, that's it for now.